Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm so excited that this many people have chosen to join us for a topic that I'm super duper passionate about. And I actually have a lot of content that I want to share with you today. So we're just going to dive right in. But without further ado, my name is Alyssa Nichol. I am a senior developer advocate at Progress. And I love Angular. Whenever I was first hired, it was specifically for Kendo UI for Angular. And I have been in this community for a really, really long time. And I'm very, very, very proud to be so. So thank you for letting me walk you through something, again, that I'm very passionate about. V17 features and highlights are part of a bigger and broader story called the Angular Renaissance. And I want to quickly define a bit of background so that makes sense to everyone, because some people might be like, what is this term? So the original European Renaissance was spanning roughly from the 14th to 17th century, and it was characterized by this renewed interest in learning and the arts. And its legacy can still be felt today in so many different categories: art, like literature, like even architecture. It was a very important time in human history. And one of the defining features of the Renaissance was this humanist movement, which emphasized the importance of individual achievement and human potential. And so I kind of, in my own mind, link the Renaissance and this buzzword with Angular because since 2016 and the creation of version 2.0, Angular hasn't seen such a period of rapid development and exciting new features. And the Angular Renaissance that we're witnessing unfold has this same emphasis that the original one did, with human potential and growth leading the way. So DX is the reason for many of the changes. And I really like to talk about not only what are some of the new features, but what were the team's thoughts? What was the community going through? What led up to that change? What were some of the influential factors? Just because I think a lot of times people can be wary of new technology or new things, and so it's good to know where this growth came from. And so that's definitely something we're going to touch on. But I, just to give you an hierarchy, we'll be talking about, first and foremost, the Angular v17 specific features that got dropped or that opened up during 17. We'll touch a little bit on what to look for in v18. And we're going to be telling this broader story of different pieces. For instance, Standalone, right, which maybe you have, maybe you haven't heard. I'd love for, if you haven't heard of Standalone or you have heard of Standalone, just kind of let me know in the chat. Maybe heard of it, don't know much about it, that kind of thing, or maybe you're using it in your apps today. But Standalone is one of these things where it was made the default option in version 17, but it obviously now it's the default, but back 2-3 versions ago was whenever it first started rolling out in a request for comments, and then in an RC for developers to start trying out. And then tweaks were made, of course, to syntax and things before it was actually launched. So we're going to talk about not only things that became official in 17, but look at the broader picture of this Renaissance. And so that includes things like Standalone. It includes things like signals, which I have a larger portion on, and I'm going to save that to the very end. I've got some code examples and to walk you through that, because signals are just a broader topic, but not very specific to 17. So I'm saving that one to the end. And there are a lot of speed improvements. The third area I want to talk about today is this combination of features that make Angular the fastest it's ever been. So this includes things like, you may have heard of control flow, right? Ifs, else, loops, things like that in your template that are now in the framework. Also things like deferrable views and optimized images, which was back a few versions that we first heard of that. There is as well, and I'm going to go back real quick to this little slide. There is as well an improved build system that includes Vite and esbuild that is default out of the box with v17. And all of these things combined make Angular the fastest that it's ever been. It's really cool to see some of the benchmarks, and we'll talk about that with specific examples in a little bit. But wait, what version? So some features during different points in development require the next version, not the latest version, the next version in order to test them out. For instance, back in v15, whenever I was like, oh, I want to try out Standalone, right? It's not official in there, but I know it's part of the RC. You needed to be on the next, not the latest version of the CLI. I wanted to address this just very briefly so that if you're trying out, not maybe today, maybe in version 18, maybe your Angular project is still in 15 or 14 or something earlier. So I just wanted you to know if you're trying to use a feature, maybe it's a feature flag in the CLI, or maybe it's a feature that you're just trying to use straight from core and you don't see it, it may be because you need to be on like the next version. And so you can simply take the npm install -g command and swap out latest for at next. And I did a couple of different versionings here. Like on the left, you can see I did the npm install at next. And so you can see here that it has the -rc.1. And so that was how I was able to use a standalone back then in v15. And then again, you can look and I did at latest. And so just a little bit of heads up. But we're going to do our first and only poll of the day because we're going to talk about Angular.dev, the new documentation site that dropped with v17. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Go to webinar, shares the screen. Excellent. And you should all be seeing that. So let's see what are your thoughts on the new docs at Angular.dev? You love them, you have some concerns or issues with them, or you haven't seen them yet. Very curious to get some answers. So if you could answer that poll, I think it times itself out. It says 5% have voted, 8, 10, there we go, we're getting numbers in. It is currently like a 70% haven't seen them, 30% love them, 2% have some concerns. It's really, really good to know. Thank you all for answering this poll. We're at 50% answered. I think once it's like close to 100, it closes out. But this is really, really good to know because I was either going to pull them up or not pull them up based on if you all were experts on the new docs or if you haven't seen them yet. But it's really, really good to know. And thank you so much for voting. Okay, let me see if I can. Excellent. And then I'm going to share the results. So you should be seeing the results now. 29% love them, 3% have concerns, and 68% haven't seen them yet. Excellent. Okay. Hide the results, and then we're going to go back to the slides. So you should be seeing the slide deck and the lovely girl. Okay. So we actually are going to talk a little bit about the docs then. We're going to take a minute, and I'm going to pull them up. Angular. Let's see, we're going to get out of full screen and we're going to go over here and go to Angular.dev. So I am a GDE, and with that amazingness comes the privilege of getting to meet once a month or more or less, depending on the season, with the Angular team and talk about upcoming features. And I apologize, I have, if you're ever alarmed at looking at like whether it's my VS Code or my browser, I have high contrast mode enabled, and I love light theme because I am very blind and it helps me see. So apologies if you're all like, my eyes. The new docs do have, I think, yeah, I was gonna say they have dark mode, and then they also have like listen to the system. But this, let me go back to, I'm gonna make it its normal size and not its zoomed in Alyssa blind size. So what I was saying is it's really cool to get to talk with the team about upcoming things, where the community is at, where we're going, and getting to hear really the behind the scenes of why new docs. You know, a lot of people with 2.0, it was such a huge shift, and that's something that the team never plans on doing again to the community. However, with things that we're going to be talking about today, if I go back to our slides and show you our audience view. If I go back to our slides and I show you the overview with some of these things, like for instance, Standalone is now default. So if you're in version 17 and your CLI is up to date and your Angular is up to date and you go ng new, there will not be modules at all in your app. And as you can imagine, that change alone, much less some of these other really cool, really innovative pieces that are essentially changing the way from the very beginning we're architecting Angular applications, this changes the way that new developers need to learn. And so Angular.io is not going anywhere, but from 17 on, all of the new documentation will actually be in, let me go back over here. All the new docs will actually be here at Angular.dev. They did a lot of cleaning up of the documentation. They ported over some things, some of the examples, but honestly, most of it has been rewritten, and it's pretty powerful stuff. If you scroll, you get like the run through that's like a throwback. And at the very, very bottom, which is one of the cool things, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about defers and what just happened on the screen, because not only are the new docs a restart of, hey, instead of teaching a brand new person walking off the street about modules, there are no modules anymore in 17, not unless you really want them. You can bring them back. We need to essentially rewrite that learning flow. And so at the very bottom of their homepage, there is this like built-in little, it's kind of like they use like Stack Blitz technologies, but it's its own little container, and it's running like an Angular web app with the latest Angular code, which is incredible and amazing. And they use this technology throughout the docs so that you can essentially play with the thing that you're in the guide to learn about. They also have some astounding tutorials that Mark Texan from the Angular team, he was a big initiator on this. He led the way on writing these tutorials. And they said the goal of the tutorials, if I put this drop down here, and I can like make the screen bigger so you can kind of read some of these are some of the flow. So it's going to start off very basic, like an anatomy of a component, and then it's going to go into event handling, forms, all the way into dependency injection, which is one of my favorite things about Angular. So they said their goal for the tutorials was to take about an hour of your time and to walk you through these things. And you see it live rendering right there. And you can also download this app and use it. There's a playground as well. But one of the cool things is not only is Angular.dev a new learning resource, a fresh start for our Angular learning path, right? But it is also a prime example of how to build a large application with things like SSR and hydration, with things like defer, like templating and lazy loading, and maybe on viewport load, things like that. Some of these really new things. So you can not only use the docs to learn from the API, from the guides, from the tutorials, but you can also go to GitHub and download them and have prime examples of how the Angular team would put together a large Angular app and have it be extremely performant. So very cool stuff. Play around with it if you want. I'm very excited. The new brand also encompasses just this look, feel, this vibe of the renaissance that our framework and our community is undergoing. But it is all backwards compatible, and no rugs are being ripped out from under you. So have no fear if you are just not ready to take the leap. But so yes, we talked about Angular.dev and the new brand. We are going to get to some of these other things like the new control flow syntax, deferred loading, and CLI updates as well. So let's jump right in. We talked about installing Next. Yes, I was like, are the slides updating? So as I mentioned with Angular.dev, many of the features that have been introduced from version 14, 15, 16, introduced as an idea, now maybe as a full concept, or maybe they're still iterating on it. A lot of these things just kind of change the way that you architect an Angular app by default, the best way, the most performant way. And one of those, as I mentioned, big pieces was standalone. As of Angular 15, standalone was stable, and as of 17, as I mentioned, it is default. And standalone changes a lot. Let's see how we are on time. 17 minutes. Okay. So I have kind of a backstory that I like to explain, like I said, for some of these features, because a lot of times I get this question at conferences. But why? Why are you taking my modules away? And to answer this question, there's a little bit of story. So I'm going to speed through it as quickly as I can, and I apologize if you know this story, but there's many people who just don't have the context. So modules are buckets for your components. A module is an Angular decorator that adds functionality to a class, and it's used to group things like shared dependencies between components. The problem with modules, they are unique to Angular. And I think the Angular, do I have the quote from the Angular team? Yep. In the words of the Angular team, Angular is one of the only web frameworks where components are not only are the smallest units of reuse. So having Angular conceptually centered around ng module has a significant impact on developer experience. And what that means is if you look at any other framework, their smallest unit of reuse is a component. And ours goes beyond a component to the module that component depends on and lives within. So I think why remove modules? A big reason was architecture simplification. It simplifies the mental model of Angular and makes it more approachable for beginners. As we mentioned, that this whole renaissance is very centered around, as I mentioned at the beginning, the DX, the developer experience. Whether you are a longtime Angular user or you are brand new to Angular or you picked it up 2 years ago, didn't love it, and you're coming back in, whatever point you're at in Angular, the developer experience and those pain points is the reason for all of these features. There are performance byproducts because of these features, which are fantastic and phenomenal. It's great if our users are happy because things are faster, right? But they really wanted to make Angular more accessible to the people using it on the day-to-day. So it enables things whenever we remove modules like fine-grained lazy loading for components and directives. It is a better developer experience, and Angular tooling processes code more efficiently. Again, one of those byproducts. There are 2 sides to Standalone, and depending on where your application is at, what version of Angular you're at that you want to try Standalone, I would recommend using one of these 2 sides. So let's say you're in an earlier stage. Let's say you're in 15 and you want to try out Standalone. I might recommend that you do this first way, which is individual modules, which are for components, directives, pipes, right? These one-off modules that are linked to these things, or maybe you even have a feature module that multiple components point towards. Getting rid of, you don't have to go crazy. You can just get rid of one component module, test it out, see how it feels, see how that works for your team. The other side of the no modules, as you may or may not, because whenever my brain first went to this, whenever the RFC for going moduleless came out, I was like, oh, that's going to be interesting to remove the main app module, right? Everything depends on the app module to bootstrap in dependencies and to set up the application. And so if you want to go moduleless, and you're at an earlier version, right? You're not newing up an app in v17. You can use the CLI command, ngg Angular core standalone. And there's also, let's see, a flag for pre-version 17 if you are newing up and you want to use that. But again, make sure you're on the latest CLI. As of 17, it is default. However, if you still want modules, you can specify this in your Angular JSON so that whenever you're using the CLI to generate components, directives, and other things in your application, that it will use modules. But by default, it is turned off. And this flag, of course, useful for 14 through 16. So this is with the flag generating application pre-version 17 in my little terminal there. And then this is with version 17. And I think this leads us nicely right into the CLI updates because there are quite a few things that changed by default. Yes, so starting from version 17, routes will be included by default when you're newing up an Angular app with the CLI, as the team noticed that most applications include routes. And so they just wanted to flip-flop that default. You, of course, can specify that you don't want routes with a special flag, but the default, if you just say ng new my app, is going to have routes. and it's not going to prompt you about it. Router guards and resolvers are also default, as well as standalone. A little note, if you are upgrading and you notice weird bugs, double check your node version, because 17 is supported with 18.3, 20.9, or stable but not supported with 21 and up. So that was actually an issue for me, and I keep forgetting it. I have no idea why I can't remember it, but I will go into an old app, I'll upgrade it, and then I'll try to use a feature and it'll be like, what are you doing? Like, and I'll get a weird error, and then I'll remember like I didn't update the node version for the application. So good to know. Moving right along, let's see. So modulus Angular, yes, as we were talking about with standalone, it is simpler to use, it's easier to reason about, it's less verbose to write, and it is faster to compile. So there's a lot of reasons why we're moving in this direction, and I understand if you have concerns, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a little bit at the end. The next section I want to talk about is control flow. So there is a new control flow syntax announced that's differing from what was in the RFC, if you saw the RFC. And I am realizing now that maybe some of you don't know what the RFC is, and I'm gonna fix that. So when I say RFC, GitHub, let us venture to the GitHubs and let us find, sorry, I don't know if it's my network whilst streaming, but apologies while it searches ever so painfully slow. So we go to Angular/Angular. And whenever the team has a new idea, a new feature, a change to an existing feature, oftentimes they have, within the last few years, started this pattern of opening a request for proposal, an RFC. And sometimes they'll tweet about it and be like, make sure you get on the latest ones. So that's under discussions. And so if we go to discussions, you'll see here where there was control flow and deferred loading. There was a signals API. There was, if we keep going even further, standalone, right? Strictly typed reactive forms. All of these things were longer conversations where they first proposed the idea and maybe a rough idea of what the API or the syntax would look like. And then the community just went ham on testing it out, giving ideas about how that feature could be different or what it should include. And then once the allotted time for that discussion or that request for RFC was over, they closed it out, and generally within the next 6 months, you would see some sort of version of that hit RC for developers to actually start testing out. So with all that being said, control flow is now, it has a new syntax that differs from what was discussed. So if you were like in on those discussions and you're like, wait, what is going on? Why does it look so different? We'll talk about the new syntax today and some of the changes. It is in developer preview right now. It is ready to try. The reason they put things into developer preview, and I've been told this many times by the team, is not because something isn't ready for production. It is because it might change, right? It is stable. It is a solid piece of working code that you can go ahead and start using, but they have not fully tested it with the community yet, so the API might change. There might be something added or tweaked if there are bugs found. And so that's why they put something in developer preview for a cycle or two, is to get that testing done. Me personally, I just use things willy-nilly as they come out in developer preview, and I just, kind of roll the dice and assume I'll figure out what broke after it updates. So if anything does change. But for control flow, there are some key blocks that I want to talk about, and you can scan this QR code and it'll take you directly to one of these links. There's actually two Angular.dev links that I'm linking here to. One is in the essentials part of the documentation, and one is an actual guide. The guide goes into more fine-grained detail, and it actually covers switch, which the essentials does not. So at if, at else, and at for are all in the essentials link, and then all of them, including switch, are in the guide. But yes, scan that if you want to check it out. I'm going to be highlighting some things from that as well as some things from the team. So here you have, I'm in the browser working with the live examples that I told you about. I think I actually was in the tutorial when I got to this point. So a little bit of spoilers if you're planning on going through the tutorials. And so here I have a for at for, and then I have item of items. And I say track item, and then I use that track by in the LI. And that's what every time I click add item, it adds this turtle emoji to an array, and that array is called items. And so it's looping through items, very similar. We've had things like this before, especially if you're familiar with version 1.0 and Angular.js days. This is much, much, much more performant, and you can check out Minko's his blog post on Angular 17 and updates for Angular 17. That is, I think it's at blog.angular.com. I can double check that link. But his blog post actually goes into some of the performance like updates and why this is so much better than any looping we've ever done before. Especially, even the asterisk like NG4, things like that. So it's very exciting stuff. But not only do we have things like at for, but like at empty, right? So we have this like placeholder here for there are no more items, which is really, really cool. I think I talked actually about the algorithm, sorry. So on top of the new syntax, the for loops algorithm for what's happening in the DOM is much smarter now. In material components, for example, I love how they dog food this. So the material components team has noticed a 30% performance improvements for components that are control flow heavy along with memory improvements. And this is, I mean, it's amazing. So track by is mandatory, this little track user or track item, but it enforces performance practices and is actually the reason that we see those performance improvements. So I'm all for it. I'm very excited about it. Part of control flow that they actually broke out into its own beast is deferred templates. So you've got your main blocks, right? You've got at if, at else, at switch. You've got these main things that you can do. At defer is one of them. It's the same, it's a little control flow block that you can put in your template, but it's so beefy and it's so freaking cool. And I think it took longer to implement. So they split it off. And so it actually defers the loading of a template piece. So whatever is inside of it. And so by default, if you don't specify anything with defer, the inner content will load whenever the browser is idle and like has nothing going on. However, as you can imagine, I'm not on the right slide. There are a lot more options that go along with something like this. So you can say at defer and then use a trigger called on viewport. And then you have a placeholder and at loading that can be provided at different points in time, which is really, really powerful. And it's all provided right there in your template, which I'm very excited about. There are other triggers that include outside of on viewport that include idle, interaction, hover, and timer. And I think they said they were expanding on those triggers, but the ones that are out right now are phenomenal. So here I've got an example where data will be shortly loading. That was a placeholder for the comments section. And I used at defer on viewport. So when the comments comes into the viewport, start loading it. And there are minimums that are available on placeholder. I think I have that on the next slide. Yeah. So both placeholder and loading have optional parameters that prevent flickering from occurring in case it loads instantly, right? You don't want it to be like, sometimes you have that flicker. And so you have a minimum of show this placeholder for this minimum amount of time, right? Loading also not only has minimum, but it also has an after parameter. So there's a lot of really, really powerful stuff with this. There's even more that you can do with triggers, prefetching, and error blocks. So I highly, highly recommend that. Here's like a screenshot, a quick screenshot I threw in of like, it's deferring on an interaction. And then you can go and see like what that trigger actually is. But yes, at Angular.dev or Angular.dev/guide/defer has all of the documentation for this, and it's really, really cool stuff. And if you go through the tutorials, you can play around with some of these things that we're talking about today. I made a little overview bit for not only the deferrable blocks, defer, placeholder, loading, and error, but as well for the triggers, idle, viewport, interaction, hover, immediate, and timer. So snag that QR code if you want it, type in that URL if you'd like, but this is one of the most powerful features, period, because this, coupled with things like signals, lazy loading, and hydration, are literally turning Angular apps into like competitive, faster than other frameworks that I won't name right now. It's amazing what we're able to do and what we're going to be able to do as the future unfolds for this new Angular. Optimized images is one of those things that I wanted to talk about. So in the docs, you can actually go and find out more, but I just wanted to show you briefly in a couple slides. You can import the ng optimized image directive from Angular Common and add it to the component imports array. And then you enable the ng optimized image directive and swap out the source attribute, right? And this is how you use an optimized image versus just a normal image tag. And I found out, I thought this was really interesting because the first time I tried to use it, I didn't specify height and width, and it absolutely would not work. And I was like, I don't want it to be a static height and width. If you don't want a static height and width, you can actually use fill attribute alternatively, and that will tell the image to act like a background image filling its containing element. So yeah, it's really, really cool stuff. And this is one of those things that, coupled with all of these features, is really going to push Angular forward. So I highly recommend giving that a go, because, and just even looking at the optimized image directive in the docs, because this is one of the things the team points to of, we wish people were taking advantage of this more. It truly would help their Angular applications be more performant. Hydration. So a lot of work has been done on the server-side rendering front for v17. Hydration is now production ready. New build tool chain has helped solve the difficulties in building universal and hybrid apps. SSR rendered apps in Angular are now built with, I mentioned this earlier, but they're now built with the new build system, which is Vite and esbuild, and it's 3 times faster than the previous SSR build times were, which is amazing. If you're building server-side applications, this is some really incredible stuff, but I think there's more coming down the pipeline. So be on the lookout for future schematics that are going to help you migrate your static applications into the application builder, which is like the shortened abbreviation term of Vite and esbuild and like the new way of building things, because they plan on rolling out a schematic that will help you transition to that and get those performance benefits, whether or not you're using SSR. But if you've never tried SSR before in Angular, you'll know that the UI flicker when the page was hydrated, whenever the content was like available and then loaded in, that has now been solved as of v17. And so if you've never tried SSR before, I think now is the time to do it. It's getting very powerful, very quick, and the bugs are being ironed out. During the announcement, the team mentioned progressive hydration and streaming are next up on the hydration list, which is really exciting. So if that's something you've been wanting from SSR and Angular, it's on its way. It's in the pipeline. The new build system. So there's more to the new build system than just Vite, dev server, and esbuild app bundling. SSR and SSG support, full ESM output. It's the default for new projects, which is killer. Opt-in for existing projects, which maybe you should consider doing. And an average of 67% prod build time improvements. That's huge and amazing. Very exciting. Highly recommend. Okay, so we're over the halfway point. I want to pull up real quick and make sure there's no like burning questions that I've just been ignoring. So track keyword is used to actually use item in our own template. Yes, but it also, I think there's more to it than that. That was Yoner, or Joiner. Sorry if I say your name wrong. I think there's more to it than that. I think without the track in our previous way of doing things was when we saw performance issues. But yes, that does allow you to use the individual item. Can you share the slides, please? Yes, we will see. We will see about that. I'm gonna keep chug-a-lugging along, but I know we might have like a recap email that's sent out even with like the recording and things. So stay tuned. And thank you for your questions. I'm gonna pop questions out and put it over on this screen. So, is there a website where we can get the official merch? Cool shirt, Omar. Thank you, Omar. The Angular team as a GDE, they sent me this and I was super grateful. I'm emceeing at NGConf this year and I'm going to try to get the team. Actually, I'm going to make a sticky note right this minute. Okay, because I think what a really, really cool, I need a pen. Where is a pen? A really cool prize. So I've emceed the last couple of years and we've gotten some feedback at NGConf that we could use some cooler swag. So I don't know if a merch shop is forthcoming. That would be really cool. But what I can do is prompt the team into giving me some shirts, and whether you're there in person or whether you have a virtual ticket, we have a ton of prizes that we give away and we'll mail to you, of course, if you're not there in person. So I'm going to say new swag as, and then I'll message Emma and tell her I need the hookup for NGConf. So that is what I can do for you, but I don't know about a merch shop. That would be really cool. Holy moly, the questions are rolling in. Has module federation changed or will it work the same? That is, I'm gonna make a sticky note over here of questions to get back to. Let me talk to Manfred. Manfred Steyer, who works on module federation, is a really good friend. And I actually recently saw some chat about that in the GDE Slack. But I was heads down at the moment. So I'll get you an answer on module federation. I know they are working towards these updates and compatibility. I think they might be there, but I will get back to you. Paul, module federation, Paul question. Okay, couple more questions, and then we're gonna jig through the signals, the signals, because even though it wasn't specifically initiated in this version, signals are officially part of core and out of developer preview in this version, and they are a big part of this renaissance. And so I wanted to take some time to teach them and go over them, but that's what the last 20 minutes will be, as well as my wrap up. So if you're like, I have signals down and I use them on the daily, then I bid you good day, sir or madam. Okay, I'm going to beautiful slides and art. Thank you so much. That was so sweet. Okay, a lot of questions actually popping in, and I don't think I'm going to have time to answer them all. Is there a guide for migration from 15 to 17? Absolutely. I don't know. I don't think the guides have been. I'm going to go back over here. Wow. Oh, wow. Banana. Banana. Okay. I don't think the guides have been officially ported over yet. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to search for it. Angular guide migration. I think you still have to use the IO update, this one right here. So you go to, what is the link? The link is update.angular.io. Let's check. Let's see if it's there. Like, I hate calling out the team. Like, they really did push this out quickly from the time of iteration to the time they got it out. But let's see if it's Angular.dev. I don't think it's on dev yet. Yeah, it's not on dev yet. So currently 17 is in both places. So maybe for 18, the update guide. But yes, you can go ahead and go, I want to go from 15 to 17. You say what type of application, show me the update, and then you scroll down. It actually has a checklist of the things that you either need to manually change or schematics that you need to run before you can get to that point. But this guide has been, I think my friend Stephen Fluent, I think, worked on this. Brilliant guy before he got into crypto now. We're gonna go back to our slides. Thank you, Chris. Absolutely. I do have the same question about module federation. Excellent. Will it become officially supported by Angular? You know what I'm gonna do? There's nothing like calling out a friend on Twitter. I am at Alyssa Nykel on Twitter, so that let's make this a public conversation. I'm going to tweet Manfred and we'll get a public response. I might message him and warn him it's coming though, but I'm pretty sure because I even heard the team, they called, it was like recently, they called Manfred out in chat and they were talking about module federation and how I really wish I could remember for you guys. They're working on it. They worked on it. It's one version away. Something. There's something going on. It's definitely not forgotten. So I'll get you an answer. Okay. Let's jig along to signals. So as with many, actually, I'm going to move this. The questions are so large. They're so large. Thank you for them. I will email you if you did not get your question answered. I apologize for the flurry. So yes, right now it is out of developer preview. For now though, the effect function is still under developer preview. So they can further iterate on its semantics, but because there was a lot of hubbub and argument about effect and what exactly it should be doing and should not be doing, and should be looking like. But the rest of signals they're good to go. In the next couple of months, new features should start landing, such as signal-based inputs. Come on now, if you're all not like, what? Like, I know, right? View queries and more. So by May in Angular v18, there's going to be a lot of features around signals that are fully fleshed out and part of the core framework. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I was reading questions as they came in. I shall get to you. But for those who are still new to the idea of signals, as with many other bits and pieces that are new, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of backstory. So when I say a built-in reactive solution, I feel like we have to answer the question of what is reactivity. In JavaScript, when we run something like this, right? We say let A equal 1, let B equal 2, let C equal A plus B, and we console log C. Very straightforward. C equals 3. No one is surprised. And you can answer in the chat if you want to answer these questions coming up. But essentially, the first console log here is 3, as we discussed. However, what happens when we set A to 20 and we console log C again, right? So A should affect C, and console log C should be anybody? I'm going to give like two sips of my coffee, and then I'll see if anyone has the right answer. We're in JavaScript, by the way, so it's good to know. There are other frameworks, languages that work differently. Nobody has the answer. Come on, you guys. It's not that early. It would still be 3 because I mean, maybe no one is surprised. This is JavaScript after all, right? And this is why we reach for things like frameworks like these, because gone are the days when you could just be a website sitting there looking good, right? Like we actually need you to do things. We need you to interact. Oh, we got 3s rolling in. C is still 3. I think there might be a delay. So I'm going to say that Chandrasekhar, Rohit, and Yoner, you're all 3 at the same time said 3. So the winners. I wish I had swag to send you. Okay, reactivity, yes. So now we need reactivity. In Angular, you're probably thinking, yeah, well, I have observables and I have onpush. This is how I handle reactivity in Angular. And it's all fine and good, right? Well, some people may or may not have bad feelings in their heart for Zone.JS. Some people might come at you if you attack Zone.JS, so just be careful. There's some really, it's a very split topic in the community. But observables, as with all things inside of Zone.js, they come with a cost, and that cost is change detection, right? So change detection runs in cycles from the top down. It checks all bound data in all components. Onpush and observables took a huge step in reducing the components that are being checked during this change detection cycle, but it can still be a lot. Zone.js, for those of you who've never looked into the nitty-gritty about Zone.js, as most developers don't, it uses monkey patching to extend JavaScript objects. So it modifies standard constructs like the HTML button element or promise so that it knows when events have ran and can tell Angular to run change detection. The problem with that, though, is not only does Zone.js use black magic, which the community frowns upon, but it modifies JavaScript objects, which is a big fat red flag for anybody in programming. Its errors can be hard to read. It's about 100 KB, which is like, and it sneaks promises into our code instead of the native async await. So you have changes. Well, I'm going to need to check all of your children too. It's a very rough system right now. And that's where this built-in reactive primitive called signals comes in. Don't you just love AI art? All of this art has been generated with AI. Of course, a lot of fine-tuning was required on my part, but I was like, I need anime crossed with Renaissance and 18th century crossed with like tech, and like this is what we were born with. So you're welcome. But in order to remove Zone.js from our Angular applications, as is the plan one day, so prep yourselves mentally. I need your mental prepped ready caps on. Zone.js is going away. It is not here to stay. There are some people who are delusional and they're like, oh, we can have it all. No, we cannot. We cannot have performance and Zone.js. So in order to remove Zone.js from our Angular applications while still having reactivity, we needed this solution like signals. It is not a new solution. The Angular team has openly admitted that they have relationships with multiple other JavaScript framework authors and that they meet regularly and they talk about the pros and cons of different implementations. And I think that's the way it should be. I think we should all pull from each other the greatest bits that we've come up with, that we've tested, build on top of that, and spiral upward, right? So I think that bit.ly might go to, I have absolutely no idea what that bit.ly goes to. It's either an old RFC or an old doc or something. Go to Angular.dev and type in signals, in which we can do that in a minute. Or even better, do the tutorials and like play around with it live in the browser. Super powerful for just learning on the fly. The change detection of tomorrow. Alyssa argued strongly to the Angular team that we should not even call it change detection. Because at the point at which we can actually get rid of Zone.js with tools like signals, we're no longer checking the tree for what changes have occurred. In fact, we know what changes have occurred because the signal is aware of those changes, right? It's this linked bit and it knows exactly who needs to change. It knows exactly who's tracking it. And so there is no change detection cycle as we know it. The team thought it would be too much of a change, though, to get rid of that terminology and completely. So we're just redefining what change detection is and what it looks like. But let's talk about the bits. Let's talk about creating a signal and what it looks like. And I have a couple demos. I'm looking. Oh, Dan answered change detection. Nice. That was one of the questions I had. Zone.js, Zone.js, I've never known developers to be opinionated. Oh, that was funny. You get me in the jollies. Okay, so here is how to create a signal in multiple different ways, right? You've got a typed signal of string. You're setting a string to it. You have an array that you're passing into the signal. You have a typed object that you're setting to the signal. It's all very much of what you would expect. At least I was not surprised by this. Reading a signal, pretty much the same, where we are in a console.log and we're saying this.shop name and we're printing that out. You gotta have the parentheses, right, in order to read from it. But same thing with an ng4, which I really should replace that now that we have control flow. But pretend it's a real for, an at for. So here we're looping through the items in a signal. The menu items available are a signal. Same thing with like beverage, where you're printing it out, but you are not printing out the whole thing, just the name or the price that's associated with it. So I think using it, creating it, it's all very much how Angular developers would anticipate it to work. To set a new value for the signal, and notify any code or template that is using that signal, you just call .set. If any code reads a signal, it will be notified about the changes. If any template is using it, it will be updated and re-rendered in that spot. Signals do not emit They are not observables. They have one value. They are not a stream of values. It's very important to make it known there's a difference, right? So do I have to chuck my observables out the window? Not unless you really want to. And right now, I am actually going to use this this opportunity presented to me today to take you back to Angular. Oh my gosh, can I spell .dev? And we're going to do what I recommended you do. And we're going to say signals, Angular signals. So if you go to signals, the signals documentation, I'm going to like zoom way in. You're going to be like, why are we so zoomed in? One more out. So you'll see in this side panel, there's an overview where you can see all the things that I'm talking about, but the actual implementation and using a signal. But there is also this gloriousness here, RxJS, still in developer preview, but there is an RxJS Interop that allows you to go to and from observables with signals and do other really cool things, right? Because you can see it all here. So do I need to chuck my observables out the window? Only if you're really feeling it, right? Like it depends on how spicy. Did you wake up and choose violence, right? So computed. Let's talk about computed. It makes me happy. Honestly, I love it. Computed can be used to create a new computed signal. So it's like it's a type of signal, right? What are you using there? It's a computed signal. What are you using there? Oh, it's a plain signal. It's just like a flavored signal. And it can be used to create one that depends on the values of other signals. Computed signals are read-only. Computed signals change when inner signals change. The value is memoized and is only processed the first time. So what do I mean by the first time? G here is computed this.e.f, and I'll actually show you that example. I think I should have already shown you that example, so I feel bad now. We'll pull the example up. We have 5 minutes left, but we're going to make it. G is, let's say you're using it 12 times in your template in different places. The first time that like G changes and is processed, and it's going to run one time, but update in all of the places, right? You're not being punished for the amount of uses of a signal. Computed can be used to create a new computed signal that depends on the values of other signals. Yes, we talked about that. I showed that. Let's see. I'm going to make a note here. That was like a dupe slide. I don't know what she was about. Dupe computed slide. There's like over 100 slides in this deck. So anytime I go to groom it, my ADHD like gets distracted by 12 different things. So unless there's like a specific like do this thing on slide 101. Okay. Effects, which are, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this section, still in developer preview. The team doesn't just love the fact that we need effects, but they are needed. So we're going to go ahead and show it. I'm going to actually pull up a demo now, but let me show it first. I'm going to get through these slides and then I'll show you the demos. So an effect is when you have code that needs to run when a signal changes. It should not be used very often. Most of the time, you're going to want to reach for a computed signal instead of an effect. But as mentioned before, it's just a different flavor of signal. There are side notes. Does not set new values to any signals. It runs anytime one or more of its inner signals change, similar to computed, and it is for logging, external APIs, a couple of other really niche use cases. You can get yourself into some big trouble with this, so don't reach for it often. What do I mean by big trouble? Just performance issues, just things that you shouldn't be doing. Don't do that. But the docs are actually very clear about exact use cases of effect, the effect signal, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's still in developer preview, because there are these questions. So let's pull up my two demos. I will herkadurka. I'm going to drag them over from this window and see if that works. I think that works. So I have a simple example and a more complex example. And I'm going to scroll down here so that while it loads, you can go ahead and read what I'm doing. So I'm setting, similar to the slides at the beginning when I was talking about reactivity, I'm going to like zoom out like 1 bit, maybe 2 bits. If that's too small, you can yell at me in the chat and I will see it. But essentially on the left are variables in Angular and then signals in Angular. This should not come as a surprise to anybody. This is the reactive example of me proving why we need reactivity. Because when I scroll down here with A equals 10, B equals 10, we're adding them together. Signal equals 10, signal equals 10, and now computing those two together to get G, which as you saw, or maybe you didn't see, so I can refresh. This bottom one here is 20, this bottom one here is 20. Whenever I click change to run this function to set them both to add 100, this one changes, this one does not. Makes sense why it doesn't change, but let's pull up a more fancy example. Do that, load that one. Okay, so here we have the same thing where we've got variables up here, we've got signals down here. However, I have a G and an H. G is set to computed, where it's computing the E and F together. So right now, initially on load, you have 10 and 1 being added together. And so G, can I make this bigger? Yeah, I'm just gonna make it just really, really ugly big. So here we have G equals 11 because we're adding those two together. And this one is 11. So no difference yet that you can see, because this is computed and this is just a plain signal. However, whenever I do A and E, whenever I change those values, right, I say plus to A for the variables above, or I update E, you can click this button here and you can see that G is updating, but H is still its static bit. And that's because computed knows, hey, I've got inner signals that depend on me. I need to change, I need to update. So yeah, that is, I'm gonna actually, this fancier one also has an effect. And if I pull this up, as I mentioned before, effects are mainly for logging or for API bits, right? So here you can see, I'm not actually logging this inside this method. It rather is an effect that is happening because of the change that is happening to that signal. Right? So effects are for whenever some piece of functionality needs to happen because a signal changes. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and grab this link. I'm in Arc, by the way. What is happening? Did it grab it? Okay. This StackBlitz link and put it in the chat. I think I can do that. Nope, it did not copy it. Okay, one second. Let me share and then I will copy the URL to the StackBlitz. I'm going to try to put it in the chat. I don't know if it I don't think it's like YouTube where it takes out links. So you can let me know if you don't see that. Hopefully you see that. So yes, we have 1 minute left. Coming in on the clock. All right, let's wrap it up. So yes, that's the StackBlitz. Please play around with signals, or even better, pull up one of, my reminders are bothering everyone. Yes. Okay. So yes, where to use signals. I talk about that a little bit. Let me pull up this one. So, yeah, those are some old ones. I also have some characteristics of signals here of just like exact implementation details. But I want to touch on something, and if you have to go, I totally understand. I'm going to like 1 minute over, about why now. Why are we tackling these changes now? This question of why keeps coming up. And I really want to talk about this mindset. So I love cycling, and this summer was my 3rd summer to ride with a group in a Peloton. And honestly, it's one of the only times that my mind is totally consumed and I feel free, because it's always racing, it's always busy, but there's so much to do, there's so much to think about and keep track of during cycling in a group, especially. It's just very freeing for me. But riding in a group is totally different ballgame than riding solo. Not only is there safety in numbers because of visibility as a group, but the group watches out for each other. They stop if there's a mechanical issue. They provide streamlining and protection from the wind for weaker members. But most importantly, perhaps, they signal for hazards on the road. And so here's a video of me doing 2 signals. The one on the left is actually me signaling for gravel, and that is one of the scariest things that you can see in a group, because it can wipe out a group. If you slide on gravel during a turn, it could take out the whole peloton. The other one is me and my carpal tunnel issues when my hand goes numb. And if you don't know me and you haven't been riding with me for a while, you might think that me shaking out my hand because it's numb and I've been writing for hours, my carpal tunnel is actually me signaling the group that there's a serious problem ahead. And this, it really reminds me, you're like, why am I telling you these intricate details about cycling? Because each community has their own subtle tells for sending an SOS up when something is going wrong and when we need to slow down, when there's danger ahead, right? When there's things that are about to shift out from under our feet. Prime example, I was doing a stream and someone said, people who aren't fully into Angular see it constantly changing and sometimes find it a bit overwhelming. Is there a way to explain actually having new versions with improvements is a good thing, right? And this mindset, it comes up a lot. But I'm here to tell you today that there is actually no danger ahead, my friends. It is truly exciting and a wonderful time for our community, and we should really embrace it and embrace this innovation to make our products and our apps not only easier to use for ourselves, but easier to use for our users. So this is carpal tunnel and not gravel, is basically what I'm saying. So I would be remiss if I did not mention that the product I represent and that I love, Kendo UI, is fully supporting v17. Our devs worked really hard to ensure that we supported v17 out of the gate. And we're very excited about implementing and coming alongside some of these new features to make our framework even better as well. But thank you so much for listening to my Angular version 17 updates webinar. I appreciate you. Please DM me on Twitter. My DMs are always open at Alyssa Nichol, and I will get you a module federation tweet as well as some emails to reply to questions that I didn't get to. But I thank you all so very much for attending today. And sorry for going 3 minutes over, but mwah, have a wonderful, wonderful day or night wherever you are. Thank you.